Great. Okay. Well, lovely to see you all, and thank you very much for joining us. As you'll know, the New Ireland Commission is a serious part of the SDLP's work at the moment, exploring key issues around constitutional change. We know that there has been an acceleration in this conversation over the last few years. Brexit has really fast-forwarded a lot of the thinking that was being done for the last many decades. And it's the SDLP's considered view that there are really three core divisions that are hampering the potential of people in Northern Ireland, and their inequality and generally our poor economic performance. There's sectarianism and those divisions within the North, and they are the impacts of the border and partition. And it's our view that we need to tackle these things together rather than in series. It's not a case of taking one after the other, and that's something we're trying to do every day in the Assembly as opposition, in Westminster as well, and in Council. And that's a key part of what we're trying to do here through the Commission. We want to shape the constitutional question in a way that means that the new Ireland that we're building might not come tomorrow or the day after that, but it is meaningful. It's something that doesn't just reverse partition and trap another unhappy large minority in a state to which they feel no allegiance. And we want it to be meaningful in terms of actually changing people's lives in a way that probably we failed to do properly with devolution. We're in the business of building something that as many people as possible can buy into and consent to. So over the last few years, starting with sort of slow, quiet dialogue on a one-to-one basis, we've been working through some of these issues through the Commission. Some of it is small, private meetings, face-to-face with people, understanding what their concerns are, what their hopes are, what their fears are, and some larger, more exploratory issues. You know, from Shankill Women's Centre to an event a couple of weeks ago in Westminster with John Alderdice, exploring his thoughts on the years and decade ahead. We're guided by 6 principles in the New Ireland Commission. The first is that reconciliation is the guiding force for everything we do. This has been surprisingly controversial over the last couple of months. We believe very firmly that if you're not doing it in a way that gets to the heart of some of the issues that have divided us, there's no point in doing it at all. For us, that is about empathy. It's about understanding where everybody has come from in terms of their thinking on constitutional change. It's about not poking each other in the eye. It's about trying as far as possible and as far as Northern politics and media allows to see the best in each other as well. The second is diversity, and we know that is another term that is absolutely drowning in platitudes and cliches, but it means for us genuinely making the New Ireland fit for and built around all of the multitudes of identity that exist. It means moving beyond a definition of Irishness that is just not Britishness, and actually incorporating the British identity. We think that the real changes in the Republic in terms of identity, in terms of ethnicity, have been an incredible advance. As the North is a little bit behind the curve on that, but that helps to get us to a place where we can be more thoughtful about incorporating the British identity. Third principle is that nobody is left behind. And as I say, that's what the 1998 institutions were supposed to be about pulling people away from the lack of opportunity that they'd experienced and the deprivation. And we want to create a new and social democratic Ireland that allows us to do that. Fourth principle is that it's going to be led by citizens and hopefully start to repair some of the distrust that people have about politics and politicians. And we also want to make sure that it isn't just tribal blocs talking to each other, as we call it, the does your unionist friend take sugar approach, you know, that we sort of suppose to speak to people rather than speaking directly over their heads. The fifth is that it's future focused and it's outward looking, and that means outward looking across the water to Great Britain, our nearest neighbour, obviously the European Union, and our place being back in Europe is a core part of the project, and much further afield as well. It wants to be serious about getting it right on climate. Neither part of the island can truly say that it's doing its best in terms of the climate crisis, and we also want to ensure that it isn't about righting the wrongs of the past. It's about something that's fit for the future and all the challenges that are coming. And the sixth is that we approach it with hope and honesty. So we're not going to succumb to sunlit uplands-itis as infected the last major constitutional debate that we were part of, whether we liked it or not. We really feel this is worth doing and is going to change the future for particularly generation of people in front of me. But we're prepared to work through the difficulties. We're prepared to be upfront with people. We're prepared to say we don't know when sometimes we don't know the answer. So one of the people who's been doing some of the clearest thinking on this is former Taoiseach Bertie Ahern, who is somebody with really an unrivaled knowledge of politics, north and south, and the relationships and the dynamics that go into that, and the structures and the institutions that have to be considered and managed north and south, and ultimately integrated. So we're delighted to have his participation here this evening, and in this format, in conversation with our Chief Executive, Conor Houston, who's going to draw out some of that thinking that is being done and that needs to be done, and how we go from here. So thank you very much for joining us. Apologies, I have a Northern Ireland Affairs Select Committee event as well, so I'm ducking out to the side, but looking forward to watching back on video. Thanks again, particularly to you for participating, and enjoy the evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire, and good evening, everybody. Lovely to see so many of you here in Leinster House and so many young, fresh faces, and that was very much what we wanted to do. We're very grateful to former Taoiseach Bertie Ahern for joining us for another In Conversation series that we have been doing as a commission, where we have been across the UK, across this island, engaging with people in terms of the conversation around the future of this island. And we're delighted to have Bertie join us tonight. And no more fitting a place than the place that was your place of work, Bertie, for a very long time as TD, as Minister, and of course ultimately then as Taoiseach. And we thought it would be appropriate, hi Jim, come on in. We thought it would be appropriate to bring some young people in, because of course the conversation we're having is all about the kind of society that you ultimately want to inherit. And perhaps as a starting point, I was 15 at the time of the Good Friday Agreement, and I just moved back from living in England with my family. Born in the north, but grew up in England for most of my childhood. So for those of you who are Dairy Girl fans, I was the original wee English fella coming back, like James in the mid-90s, with an English accent and trying to navigate my way through Northern Ireland politics. I didn't know which way was up, as they say. But one of the most defining moments of my adolescent years was watching the peace process culminate in the Good Friday Agreement. And little did I think all these years later I'd be sitting with one of its key architects, one of the key drivers as to why we have that peace agreement. And I was thinking, coming here today with these young people in front of us, that of course, for me, the agreement is something that I can remember vividly where I was. I was outside the Waterfront Hall in Belfast when the referendum happened, the yes vote, with my family. I can still remember that moment and what the agreement meant, because for me, it was about the politics of hope, the politics of overcoming the impossible. And for many of you, of course, you were born, looking around the room, not wanting to point anybody out to exclude them, but I imagine most of you were born after the agreement was signed, and therefore it is part of history for you. So I suppose to start with, we're going to look very much to the future tonight, but I think it's very important. One of the things the Commission said from the outset is that the Belfast Good Friday Agreement is our foundation stone. We are not doing anything but building upon the agreement. This is not about tearing up the agreement. This is not about ending the agreement. This is about saying, what do we do next with the agreement? So I think to look forward, we need to look backward, and perhaps you could share your own views on why, for this generation, the agreement is not just something to be read about in history books, but it's actually something to be fought for and protected and celebrated to this day.
Yeah, thanks Conor, and thanks to your colleagues in SDLP for organising this series, and I know you've been putting a lot of effort over the last year and through the winter and through springtime, bringing people together and discussing what is a very important debate. And I think what you're doing is really useful, because you're just giving a focus for people to set their views on this. Nobody is asking anyone to change their views. Nobody is asking anyone to vote on anything. Nobody is saying this isn't a lobby for any side or another. So my congratulations to you and your team in the party for organising it. And I've seen I saw John Alderdice, a good friend of mine, obviously through the years, and I've seen a lot of the publicity around it. So well done to that, and thanks to the students. And Jim O'Callaghan has joined us too, and good to see Jim. And always nice to be in Leinster House. I don't come here too often nowadays, so it's I spent my lifetime here, so it's nice to come back now and again. I'm glad to see they get days off here. I don't remember ever getting days off when I worked in this place, but anyway, it's good to see it's a bit more family friendly than it used to be. I think one of the things that amuses me now is that almost every week Sandra gets a call from students who were doing either the Leaving Cert or doing or PhDs or doing some project, and they want to talk about the Good Friday Agreement. And of course it's always, as you said, in the historical context, but it's great that it's on the curriculum here, and that people are learning about it. And nobody wants to drag people back into the terrible past, but I do think it's important when we're talking about what we're trying to do in the long term, that we have an understanding of it. And I've spent the last week or two doing a lot of things around the 50th anniversary of the Dublin Monaghan bombings, which of course was probably the worst of all the troubles that happened down here, both Monaghan and in Dublin, where so many people were killed. And I've been meeting a lot of the families and meeting people that were there, and some of the families were wiped out in that bombing, like the O'Briens, but it does bring you back. I mean, I was an accountant in the Mater Hospital on that day. We were about to leave, and as you tend to do on a Friday night, or at least people used to do on a Friday night, every boy, girl, man, woman of sensible proportions would go to a pub, and that's where I was heading. Some of my friends had gone ahead of me, and I found myself just around the corner from Parnell Street bomb, and and then afterwards it was just the one, because it was next week's anniversary, just one of the terrible things of the trouble. And having watched in the hospital those few days, and all the trauma and the operations and the deaths and then the funerals, and it was a horrendous time, but that was just one of thousands of events. And I suppose for me in politics, I was elected to this place a few years after that. And always on the agenda of our party in Fianna Fáil was, the troubles and the problems in the north. And I think we all thought about, is there something we can do about it more than talking about it? Because if talking would have solved it, maybe we would have never had the problems in the first place back hundreds of years ago. So I and others, we started working, I think, hard through the 80s and the 90s, trying to build up contacts and build up friendships in the north, ones that I hold to this day, going to university debates, going to LNH and UCD, and going to Trinity debates, and other college debates at the time, kicking around solutions. And as you know, Con, we could be here all night talking about all the solutions that were thrown up during the years. Most of them went nowhere. But there were a lot of good discussions, the British-Irish parliamentary discussions, British-Irish meetings in Oxford or Cambridge every alternative year. So, through all of that, you built up friendships. And I think from the early 90s, it became kind of clear that at least there was a near to trying to see if we could, articulate something that might be near the solution. And the 91-92 talks, people forget about those, but 91 is an awful long time for this audience. You look back 91-92. But it was the first time that all the parties in the North kind of sat down in the committee of what they might be in favour of. They were all excellent, as politicians tend to be at times, saying what they were against. But the 91-92 didn't bring to a conclusion. But I always reflected back on it because it was an attempt by all parties to say that this is something we would be prepared to look at. That left moving quickly to the Down Street Declaration in '93, which was a hugely important document. John Major, Albert Reynolds, Archbishop Eames, who played a big. I had several meetings with Archbishop Eames on the text of that. He was really helpful. And the whole trick of that was, and I always say to people who weren't born in the Good Friday Agreement, rather than just reading the agreement, read the Down Street Declaration. Take it 10 minutes. It's online. And the object of it was in as few words as we possibly could, to put out what the aspirations and what the difficulties were with the agreement, or with the Troubles. And then that led to the ceasefires in '94, and then on to where Tony Blair and I took it up. We started working in '94 in opposition, and then on to the agreement. So the agreement was a long run through. It wasn't something that just happened between September 97 and Good Friday 98. And the whole thing was that we could try and do a document that ended the Troubles, because that was the big motivation. Was there something we could do to stop the killing, the daily mayhem of bombs, and all the traumas for all the families and all the good people who were not involved, and people who shouldn't have been involved, and all the other problems. So I think 100 times we thought we had an agreement, and 500 times we thought we hadn't got an agreement. That's the way it was. But at least it was the shared will of all the parties. And I think, the Good Friday Agreement stands the test of time, because it was what people wanted to do at that time. Now, as you and I would probably agree, Conor, there are plenty of things that should move on now and should happen, but at that time it was end the Troubles, trying to find institutions where people could work together and where we could move the agenda away from the terrible violence, and see if we could get politicians to work. And I think that's the strong point of the agreement.
But I think that very much was John Allardyce's, when we had a conversation with him in London a couple of weeks ago, and he said, look, stopping the violence. We knew if we stopped the violence, that was the starting point, and everything else could come from there. And I think one of the things that we should never forget is that until the agreement, and George Mitchell, to paraphrase him, talked about 800 days of failure. It just took one day of success. But I remember, certainly as a teenager, there was no guarantee that the agreement was going to happen. We can look back now and say, well, it was all choreographing towards this moment. But even, and in fact, the documentaries around the 25th anniversary demonstrated, even till the hours before the agreement, it was still looking impossible that it would ever happen. So
I think the night before, yeah. I mean, even the night before, I remember, 8 o'clock the night before, which was less than 24 hours before the end, you would say, we knew that we had made a lot of progress, but was there enough to carry everybody? Because it was 10 political parties, 2 governments. And, the poll taken a few weeks before said we had a 5% chance of success, which wasn't exactly good. So it was, I think, just, you need in all these things, you need, a good document, but you need luck as well. Yeah. And you need, I think, a lot of goodwill from most people, not everybody, but most people, to say that, they wanted to see it across the line. Sure. And, that was proved subsequently in the referendum.
I think there was 2 ingredients came out of your description of the choreography towards the agreement. The first was dialogue, and sustained dialogue. that was relentless. Even when, of course, atrocities continued to happen, there was always dialogue happening, whether openly or behind the scenes. But the second piece, of course, is the relationships. It was all about relationships, and you've talked about your relationship with Tony Blair, the relationships between the parties, because of course when these talks, many of these people had never been in the same room with one another, and so there was a course of building those relationships. And I suppose one of the testaments of the agreement is not just the personal relationships between the personalities, but of course if we look at the transformed relationships between the communities in the north, between north-south and between Britain and Ireland, the agreement is I suppose how you might do relationships.
Yeah, you see, I suppose people look back now, and I mean, the fact of the matter, there were a lot of people. If you take 10 parties, some delegations were small, some were big, but you're talking about a few hundred people still, and they were the key people representing the parties. But then they all had to go to their wider constituency basis and their electorate and their families. So, like, there were a lot of very good reasons, legitimate reasons, which I totally understood on all sides, why people hated each other. And it never made me happy, the level of bitterness and hate, but I understood it. Like, if somebody was to shoot your mother or father, or someone blow up one of your family, or somebody who's nothing to do with anything gets killed on a Saturday night, and just because they happen to be either Protestant or Catholic, like, there were huge grounds why people just hated each other. So in those circumstances, we were trying to get an agreement. So it's very hard to, you're not just dealing with, is clause 2.1 well drafted, and does it comply with the constitutional position of something, or like you're trying to deal with the emotions that people had, which I totally understood. And I probably spent most of my life, for many years, meeting widows of RUC officers, parents of British Army people were killed, families of Republicans and nationalists, people that were involved in the paramilitary groups who were killed. So, like, there were so many different groups, and they all had their own story, and they all had their own facts of why they got involved, or why this happened, or why that happened. And of course, a huge of them never wanted to get involved at all, just became victims of the trouble. So, I think when we talk now, we talk about, they say, well, why 26 years on and we're still talking about reconciliation? Why are we still, trying to deal with some of those issues? It is because terrible things happened on all sides. People did terrible things on all sides. There was state violence, there was paramilitary violence, there was random violence, there was all kind of violence, and you can, A to Z, include everything in it. But all of that has led to a position where it's not just possible to have an agreement and say, now folks, we've all signed up. Like George Mitchell, I remember George Mitchell said to me just before we went down to sign the agreement, he said, I wish you and Tony well. I'm out of here in about an hour. I'm back to the States. It's going to take you a long time to negotiate this, to implement it. And we're probably still at that, but I spent 10 years of my life after the agreement with Tony. And I suppose we're still at it, and that's why we're here today. We're still, but anyway, that was the launch pad, and everything that comes after that is to build on that.
You touched upon the word reconciliation there, and obviously it's a promise yet to be fulfilled within the agreement. It's of course the New Ireland Commission. We were deciding how to start our work. From the multiple conversations we were having right across the community, including within the Unionist and Loyalist community, the word reconciliation kept coming up. So our guiding principle is reconciliation. And I suppose we say there can be, by definition, no new Ireland unless it is founded upon trying to ensure and achieve reconciliation. But we go further in saying that we believe the conversation about a new Ireland, if done in the right way, based on mutual respect, based on engaging with people, based on respecting difference, that actually in itself it can be a process of reconciliation. Would you agree with that analysis by the...
Yeah, I do, and thankfully, you know, as time moves on, and I don't critical of anybody, but people's views mature as well. At one stage, we had people calling for an early plebiscite, so we'll have the vote, you know, in a month's time. Thankfully, people stopped, you know, that nonsense, because, you know, the only way this can ever work is that you get understanding and reconciliation, people being able to build up friendships, people being able to never forget, but not to have the same level of mistrust and bitterness, hatred, enmity that they had in the past. And that just comes with you know, reconciliation, everyone working hard, and everyone has a part to play in this. Every single man, woman, child, in the island of Ireland, in my view, it's doing things, you know, to be helpful, doing things to understand the other side. You know my view in this, Conor. The idea of having a head count, a sectarian head count, or a head count based on political philosophies is a waste of time. Even if it was passed one way or the other, or defeated one way or the other, it would probably cause more problems. The only way you can come around it is by people over a prolonged period of time building up confidence and trust and understanding that they're not threatened, that there's a fair compromise in it. And I, as you know, I've spent hours and hours, even in recent years, listen to people of all the traditions in the north, and I think people understand that now. And there is a huge change. I won't mention the location because it would be unfair, but I was with a man the other night, and his daughter is married a Protestant, and he said it's great fun. They're having great banter about a Catholic marrying a Protestant. And you know, I said, well, I'm glad that it's good fun. He says, yeah, because if it was 20 years ago or 30 years ago, one of them would be shot. So, and probably the fella, because that was the way it was. So now the fact that we get to a stage where it's a bit of fun, a bit of joke, like a North Sider marrying a South Sider, which is a terrible thing to happen. So that's what you want. So it's just an example of small things helping to build the confidence.
I think that, I mean, just to be clear, when we talk about, and there's been quite a bit of media on this, that the language around reconciliation we have to use carefully, because we're not saying it's a prerequisite, because of course we respect the right of people through a poll if necessary to change the constitution. That's what the agreement says, that's what the agreement promises. But it's an aspiration. It's an aspiration to say, let's have a genuine inclusive conversation and see what we can build with all the traditions of this island. That's what we certainly mean by a new island. You've talked, Bertie, before, and you alluded to there, about everybody, and I'm conscious you've an audience here of people, and I know a few faces here of people who are civic activists already doing great service to their country and to this island. But you know, we've talked about the hard yards that we all have to do. I always tell the story of just I used to go for walks with people. I'd reach out on Twitter to people I disagree with and try and get them to go for a walk or meet for a coffee. And it was fascinating, some of the conversations I ended up having, one of which led to me being introduced to a group of bonfire builders in North Belfast, and going for a walk with half a dozen young loyalist bonfire builders and listening to their experience of why they got involved, and them asking me questions about what I meant by a new island. And to me, that was an act of reconciliation. Why do I say that? Because nobody changed their identity in that conversation. I'm still an Irishman, proud living in the north, believing in a new island. They were still proud British young men living in Northern Ireland, proudly loyalist, celebrating their tradition. Nobody compromised anything, nobody was asked to give up anything, but there was an understanding. And I just wonder, is that what we mean by the hard yards? Is it an understanding process?
Yeah, it is. I mean, you know, we are it's for the audience today of the young people that are here. It's hard to believe, but that the rows that used to happen because nationalists wanted to celebrate St. Patrick's Day and loyalists wanted to, and Orangemen wanted to celebrate the 12th. And of course, every year then there was the fear and there was the nationalists getting out for the 12th and the bonfires and all the horrors. The reality is we have to, but we are moving, we're getting to a position where people can accept that Paddy's Day is Paddy's Day and it's a national holiday and down here and you know, nationalists like to celebrate it in the north. And that the 12th is coming a day where there's not anything like the friction that was there. It was funny that the only parade that was ever, the Orange Parade, that was never really affected in all the troubles was the one in Rosslowna in Donegal. They were able to parade in a Republican area, no, there was never a problem. But we have to get to that position. We have to get to where people can respect the traditions of the orange and respect the traditions of the green, and that we can all. The progress we've made, people might think it's still sensitive, but compared to where it was, thankfully there's very little trouble now, and I think we're getting that. And the same with matches. The people, you know, can come to sports. Sports is a great healer, and I think that people can come to matches, and that. I mean, I have, as you know, I've brought loyalists to Croke Park, and they think the place was great, and you know, the only problem I have between Northern Ireland and Republic of Ireland is that between us we could get one decent team, and it's the political agenda be well worth it even if we could achieve that. But
you heard it calls for a national team. Yeah.
Well, there'll be a lot of people against that too. But I shall quickly add it was us lot pulled out of that. It was the Republican side that pulled out of the national team. But it's but every little thing that helps to build up you know, reconciliation. We've seen that in recent years. We've seen Arlene went to the Fermanagh match when they were in Croke Park, and you know, all those things help, and so that's reconciliation. I mean, it's holding the hand out of friendship and people realising that it's not us and them. You know, it's possible to build a different kind of relationship and respect for each other, and to show solidarity with each other. And you know, I think that's it. I'd love to say we've made more progress, but we have made a lot of progress.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that sort of occurs to me is that the Commission, in its approach, understands that we're trying to build a new island for all the traditions. And that's a wide range of people. It's people who've made this island their home in recent decades. It's of course then people from a British Unionist tradition. And we respect, obviously, through the agreement, the legitimate right for people to be Unionists, to advocate for the Union, to be British, and nothing we are doing is seeking to undermine or attack that legitimacy. But maybe, I mean, I think you're well credited, even by many within the Loyalist community, as being someone who did seriously engage with unionism, with unionist concerns. We've had this morning, in light of this event taking place, the TUV leader talk about come to my parlour, said the spider to the fly, and sort of criticising events like this and words that you and I might say around this towards unionism has been platitudes. What would you say to people who think that we're just trying to snare them into a trap?
Yeah, but you know, I know people say that. I wish they didn't say it. I mean, I think Jim Allister is an interesting guy. I have no problem with Jim Allister that he argues his case. And if Jim Allister has a view and his view of how Northern Ireland should be or this island should be in the future, like, then he's the right to express that. He's an elected representative as well, so you know, I think his view is totally welcome, and I'd be glad to, if I had political power of some side, I'd be glad to talk to Jim Allister any time, and wish him well in his efforts. So there's no argument about any of that. And he shouldn't feel that anyone is out to, not least the SDLP in this case, to be attacking your function or me. I remember when I got dealing with Ian Paisley first, and Ian Paisley, I was 10 years dealing with the great Reverend Ian Paisley before he shook hands to me. It must have been the longest courtship that ever was. But, and he really thought that, coming down here was a bit of a trick and that we'd be all up against him. And then what built up the relationship between me and him was his churches were being attacked. And I started genuinely trying to get the Gardaí to help in protecting his churches. And so my early meetings with him were just about his churches, particularly his border churches. And he I think over a short enough period of time, saw that I was serious about doing that. And then I started dealing with him with some issues around agriculture and fisheries, and he was, very big in agriculture and fisheries. And then he realised that the southern farmers and northern farmers had the same agenda, and we cooperating at EU level. Though when I was in the EU Parliament at one stage, I think it must have been the President of the EU, he did come shouting and roaring, and trying to upset the place, and then met him outside and he was nice as pie to me. So he an interesting man. But over time, we built up a really, good relationship, and we worked together. And then he saw that what we were trying to do was to bring peace and to end the troubles and to help his community and help all communities. And I visited him, his house. Baroness Eileen, a very good friend of mine, the family, and so he didn't. I mean, did he ever think that I was going to turn him into a Catholic from being a Presbyterian? Did he ever think that I was going to loop him into standing in Dáil Éireann or something? No, he didn't. He believed that we had the interests of the citizens of this island to work in harmony and peace and to try and make a better future for ourselves. And we didn't work out what would happen in 10 years or 20 years or 30 years. So nobody should feel a threat. It's only if you come in and you try to say, this is the way it is, that this is the way it has to be. And if you don't like this, lump it, but those days are gone.
I think
there's nobody, yeah. and Jim shouldn't think that that's the agenda of any of us. I mean, we just want to make this a better island for all of us, and that we can try and build as much confidence and security. And what I'd love to do, of course, is find a new Ireland where we could all work together. But that might be possible. Maybe it's not possible. But at least to participate in the discussion. That's all anyone's asking anybody.
That's absolutely. It's an invitation, and it's all that the work that we have done. And of course, we have a former moderator of the Presbyterian Church involved with us. We've engaged with numerous unionist community groups and loyalist community groups, and it's really important that we do that engagement. And for us, this is not imposing something, it's an invitation to have a conversation about the kind of society we have. It's why Claire took the time at the beginning of this to set out the principles. So the Commission's starting point is we have a set of shared principles, and when we share those, regardless of the demographic, regardless of the community background, people tend to say, well, I don't have any problem with building a society based on reconciliation, based on no one left behind, based on diversity.
So, the agreement, I think one thing that's very important, Conor, is what the Good Friday Agreement stated, very clearly that it was an aspiration for people to have a united Ireland. We're still talking about United Ireland 26 years ago. We tend to say New Ireland now. And that was an aspiration of a section of the people. And that it was their legitimate right to be able to peacefully and by consent to fight that case. So that is the basis of the agreement. And of course, it's totally accepted that those who believe in the union are entitled to make their case. I mean, that's their right. That's their right, and you know, and ultimately, someday, if people can bring it to a stage where they can make a lot of progress, people then might have to decide in a vote at some future time. So I mean, they're the pillars. So there's nothing new in this. This was the basis of the whole end of the Troubles, end of the conflict, the Good Friday Agreement, which is seen internationally as a basis for dialogue. I mean, there's not a week that there's not somebody here involved. I mean, we've had the Kosovo people, you know, in so many other countries are here in the last few days, all over here to look at how we did it, how we, and I always say to them, listen, no two conflicts are the same, but just understand what we're trying to do. Nobody's trying to force anyone anywhere. All we're trying to do is work an agreement and try and bring it to a conclusion, and that might take, you know, nth long or might not. So nobody has to be fearful, and the only ones I think we have to be fearful are those people who try to put fear into that debate. They're the only ones to be fearful of.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because they have another agenda.
And of course, there is a generation growing up, both north and south, who maybe are defining themselves in all kinds of different ways, rather than traditional unionists, nationalists, and in fact, we have many people who are finding unity curious. Or describe themselves as New Islanders rather than perhaps traditional sort of nationalist. But I suppose one of the things, but I'd be interested in your view on this, is the importance of having these conversations, because there are some quarters who say, don't have these conversations, don't upset the apple cart, just everybody stop talking about the national issue or the constitutional issue or the future of this island, and then nobody will get upset. I take it that's also can be unhealthy and unhelpful, because actually it can be a process of reconciliation, as we say, having these conversations.
Yeah, no, well listen, back in 1921 people thought, you know, some people wanted to put the debate into ice, so that didn't work. No, I think the right thing to do now is to have the ongoing conversations, and at the same time working to try to build what we were talking about, the reconciliation. Because we never get a New Ireland unless people from different traditions can feel comfortable with what the New Ireland is. And, you know, we don't want to go back to the old days in 1921 when a lot of people of the Protestant faith left the Republic because they felt that they wouldn't get a fair deal. And then we had the civil rights movement where a lot of people of the nationalists and the Catholic faith felt they were either not needed or not wanted in the north, and that they should get out. So what we're trying to do is to learn from 100 years of history, and to do it in a way where people can express their views. And what the end of that debate, I don't know what the end of that debate will be, but I certainly know it's worth the effort. It's worth the effort of you know, conciliation and trying to build harmony and understanding and respect for people, where we've no violence, and where people can decide what's best. And I think people will see. I mean, I've met people from unionist and loyalist backgrounds. I don't think they'd ever be voting for a united Ireland in the foreseeable future, or maybe not for a new Ireland. But they are open to having far better relationships and understanding with us, and that's what we should be putting our efforts into.
Absolutely. And even just in having the conversation, certainly in the work we've done within unionist loyal communities, we find that engaging takes away fear. So even if what's something that is not wanted or not aspired for, it's changing how people perceive.
Well, there is, Conor, the view, and I suppose I should say it, there is the view that and it's a suspicion and it's a fear. So, you know, I don't want to say it's not there. There are senior people have said to me, no, if we have the discussion, if we turned up at a meeting, even if we turned up in the audience at this meeting, then we're on the bar of soap, we're on the slippery soap. So then we're into the dialogue, and then that means that we were prepared to have the dialogue that ultimately could end up, and then we're bought in. Now, so I think we're all very clear that that is not not the game. I mean, and that was in 1984 when people here don't remember, but the New Ireland Forum was that same reason. But the McGimpsey brothers, who were two brothers from the Unionist tradition, they came down, but most of the parties wouldn't come down. And that was a pity then, because I think we would have made a lot of progress earlier. And John Hume, your own party leader, was, very involved in that, as he was in the Good Friday Agreement in my time. But it's far better that we have the discussion and the dialogue, but nobody has been. You can come along to the meeting, put your views, and say you would never ever have anything to do with a New Ireland. But that's that view. But I find with loyalist people, they're prepared to listen and discuss. They're not going to. Nobody's asking them to change their mind.
That's right. You talked there, actually, you alluded to the New Ireland Forum, and in fact the work of setting up the commission, it looked back to the forum, and earlier when you opened up, and I'm going to talk a little bit of process, and then I want to take some questions from the young people here, but you sort of outlined very clearly the process, sort of the choreography of kind of New Ireland Forum, peace talks, including the Downing Street Declaration, leading to the agreement, and then I suppose a quarter of a century of trying to implement that agreement and perfect that agreement. So process is important. How we do things is very important. And I think there's a lot of people on all sides of this conversation struggling and asking, what's next? What does the next phase of this process look like? Obviously, the government, Micheál Martin, Colm Eastwood, very instrumental in their discussions in what became the Shared Islands Unit. That's real, that's practical, that's real money, building relationships, building infrastructure, bringing communities together. There's obviously the ongoing work of the peace money from the European Union. So there are some aspects of the state in terms of process. But how do you see, what's the next phase of process? Is it a political one? Is it a civic one? We hear a lot of people calling for citizens' assemblies to advance this conversation. But certainly wherever we go, we find people are up for this conversation, but it's really important, of course, that there's process around it. So what do you see as kind of the next phase of the process?
Yeah. I'm just very clear, I'm not a fan of the Citizen Assembly on this issue. Might have done a good job, and it may not have done a good job on other issues, but that's point of view. But for this issue, it's not the road to go. No, the road to go, in my view, is step by step. Organisations, community groups, the cross-border alliances that go on, the sporting alliances, the organisations in the south and the north, working together in the common good. Departments cooperating with each other on international issues. It's a bit more difficult now because of the UK leaving the European Union, but that's another day's work. We better not start talking about Brexit. We'll be here till tomorrow.
I can't believe we've got this far without mentioning Brexit.
But anyway, we'll try and leave it aside. But it's certainly to try and keep all those Ireland funds and all the initiatives that have happened out of that. And I think schools, having contacts with schools, cross-religious schools working together into denominations. And there's a lot of that good work happening in the north now, where there's Catholic schools and Protestant schools not integrating. That's not the way to press it. But who say are doing Spanish, and they're using the Spanish teacher with both schools, or the joint classes, things that would never happened, wouldn't have happened 15 years ago. Now they're happening. So there's a sharing resources and participation in that. And I think that the greater work for government, some of the universities are doing this. I know there's several universities doing different projects, Queen's and DCU and UCD, I think of all them were. But the academic work of building on the Share Island, what the SRI and others have done, of what would in New Ireland look like. The hard questions, how would the legal system, your own profession, how would the legal system integrate itself? How would PSNI and the Garda Síochána integrate itself? How would the state companies integrate with the state companies in the north? How would departments integrate? How would the teaching professions? Now, I think all of those are doable, but someone has to do the work to say how it would work. But before you can ask the people ever, whether it takes 10 or 20 years to have a vote, You have to be able to put the blueprint in front of what they're voting for. I mean, to go out and ask the electorate, to vote for New Ireland, and then when you're asked a question at the door, well, how will the PSNI and the Garda Síochána amalgamate? How will the Department of Finance North and South work? I never mentioned the word money for a minute, because that's obviously but all of that work has to be done. So that's a project. But I'd put that project no more than side by side with the everyday project of communication, cooperation, integrating, people working together, farmers dealing with farmers in the north, and a lot of this goes ahead. That's why I was kind of a bit worried in the recent agreement, and it's not to bring in a cost of justice. I don't want to not mention it, that I didn't love the last 30 or 40 pages of the last agreement, because it was redefining East-West from what I agreed. I had a very clear definition what East-West was in an international agreement registered with the UN, and then I see an East-West that is a different thing. I don't want to make too much more, but I don't want to say that I agree with something that I think
we didn't either, and it was more around the fact that going back to the word relationships, making changes to anything in Northern Ireland works best when the parties and the two governments work sync hand in glove rather than side deals, which I think is what you're saying. But I think, so you're talking there about that process, and I think you've put it in two twin tracks. One is the relationship building, we can call it dialogue, which is obviously a lot of the work we're engaged in. There's then kind of the nuts and bolts, the practicalities, and that's definitely where certainly our people ask those questions. We were on the Shankill, and they said, well, what would this mean for my pocket, for my children's education, for my mother on a waiting list? And of course we have to, if we're going to ask people to make it, we're going to have to be able to answer those questions. And you're right, there's incredible work, Ahern's project and the work that many of the universities are engaged in. But I suppose the question goes, is there a need for the state, for the government to engage in that kind of conversation? Is it a re-establishment of something like the New Ireland Forum, which becomes a space in which different groups, different parties can come together to have these conversations? Are we there yet, or do we need to?
I think we need to do the work. I think, whether CSRI are doing some of the work on behalf of the government, some of the universities probably need to be funded by the government. But I think the projects, that work needs to be done. And I don't think any of it is rocket science, by the way, because I think most of the organisations could integrate very well if they had to. But you have to go through the A to a Z. How would it happen? And the government have to be directly involved in that work. It's a separate function to what the Shared Island, the very good work that the Shared Island has been doing since Micheál Martin set it up. So that goes ahead anyway in helping in infrastructure projects. But it's more the mechanics of how it could work. And I don't think it was helpful. I saw one report, and of course, it's a short enough report, and then the only thing they could find as the headline is it'll cost 80 billion or something. That's not the way. There will be a cost factor eventually, but was that 80 billion to do with last year, next year, or the year after? That's not the way to go. It's the mechanics of how it will work. But side by side, all the other work goes ahead. And I think if for those people who want to work on the union, and I know there are some groups that say they're going to prepare their case on why they're better with the union, like we shouldn't be afraid to participate in those discussions.
We have openly participated in those.
That's fair game, because you can't be criticising one side for not coming in if you're not prepared to participate in the other side. So they're the steps. I think all of them are doable. All of them are realistic. All of them will not cost a fortune to actually do that work, and will help as the healing process goes on. Because as we know from the legacy legislation and all of the other things, and now we have the anniversary of Dublin Man and Bombs, that we know all these events, and there's thousands of them, are all still working. They're never to be forgotten, but time does help to heal some of them.
Of course. And I think, Bertie, what you talked about there, and again, our approach is the New Ireland Commission is not going to be delivering a new Ireland for everyone. We hope to be part of that conversation. We hope to play a role in that conversation. But I think what you're talking about is this need for sort of a grand coalition or a movement of multiple parts to be. Exactly. It's not going to be the prerogative of one party.
No. Your work might come to a conclusion of this is the conclusions of your work, what you have done, and the considerable effort you're putting into this, and that will come to your report. But that report will all be feeding into where we go. And I think anybody who's seriously engaged with the issue is to be commended for it, not criticised for it. Yeah.
Because we're watching, of course, Scotland and seeing what happens if there's one party leading a nationalist agenda, or that it sometimes is not the most sensible strategy. To think how close Scottish independence was a decade ago and where we are today. Yeah. Bertie, thank you very much for speaking to me this evening. Before we finish up, I'm keen, I hope you've enjoyed the conversation, but I'm keen to allow some of our young people here to ask some questions of Bertie, and of course respecting our press. The press would be very welcome to ask questions to you, Amanda, and if there's any other journalists, but I see Amanda there. So has anybody got a question?
Hello, I'm Jonathan. You can tell by my accent I'm not from down south. I thank you for holding this discussion. I myself am from a unionist background. I worked in Jim Alister's office last summer. I've canvassed with Jim Alister in my constituency of Strangford, so I'm probably somewhat unlike him being here today. But my question is, as a unionist, and like we're talking about all of this dialogue, for me, in the wake of the protocol, I know we're talking about Brexit now, in the wake of the protocol, in the wake of the collapse of Stormont, I thought, much like many unionist concerns that were arguably the biggest constitutional threat Northern Ireland has faced were trivialised. So if this is what unionists are feeling now, how does that get remedied in a new Ireland? And will there be safeguards for such a sizable minority? How does a unionist voice look like? Or it might be a Protestant voice, how you even define a unionist in a New Ireland, that remains to be seen. But what are the safeguards for a unionist or of the like in a New Ireland?
No, I think it's hugely important that if we were to have a new Ireland, that there's clearly documented safeguards for what would be a unionist minority then. And I think I haven't met anybody in all the debates I've been involved in the last 20 or 30 years who doesn't get that, the one thing, and I don't say this in any disrespectful way, the one thing any of us who are serious about this issue would not like is for unions to be treated the way nationalists were in the North. That's the last thing any of us would ever want to do. Or if you go back in history to the way maybe Protestants were treated here back 100 years ago, where many of their places were burned, and so our history has shown us that that's definitely a recipe for disaster. So I think the benefit of this debate and all the debate is to work out if there was an appetite to make this work, is what are those safeguards? But there would have to be safeguards, religious ones obviously, in the churches in the north are stronger and they're very strong on this position that they'd have their protections, and also that unionist traditions would be fully respected in law. So I couldn't ever look at you seriously and say, will you vote for the New Ireland unless we did that, because you'd be asking you to and I think that's what. And to be honest, as a Republican and a nationalist and someone who would love to see United Ireland, I think you'd probably get far better safeguards than you will from your buddies across the water.
Can I just the next question? John, thank you so much for coming, and I really respect you for asking the question, and thank you for being here.
And give Jim my regards.
Yeah. Sorry. But in all sincerity, you can see, you know, we're very sincere, and the approach of the Commission is not about demeaning unionism or demeaning British. In fact, it's the reverse. It's how do we're asking a question. It's why I deliberately brought up Jim's comments, because we're deliberately, well, we don't want to be seen that we're trying to snare people into it. We're being very honest about what we're trying to do, and we're trying to, we'd love you to be part of that conversation, and that's a genuine approach and offer of this of the Commission and the work that we're trying to do. New Ireland doesn't happen without you in it, and that doesn't mean you're going to vote for it, doesn't mean you have to, but we genuinely don't have a New Ireland unless we celebrate the British tradition, unionist tradition. And in fact, coming here to Leinster House, I was reflecting one of the last times I was here was for an event for the unveiling of Lord Trimble, David Trimble's bust, which is just down in the atrium next door, and you should go there, because for me that evening I was very emotional, because I realised it was probably one of the first times that Britishness and unionism have been celebrated in a meaningful way in this place, and we need to do many more events like that across this island. So I just thought it was one example. I was coming here tonight thinking of that, going, that's an example of the kind of acts, the kind of things we need to do much more, where you see the British unionist tradition celebrated on this island. So thank you for coming. So I see, I'll go there, and then Tara Grace.
Hiya. So thank you for your time. I also want to say thank you for coming to the very nice to get out of distracted. Just a question. You've been a lot of reflection on North-South relationships and building understanding between Britishness and Irishness, but there are two governments in the middle of this. There's the British government and the Irish government. I suppose you were right there in the middle to see what was possible when the relationship these West were strong. But I get into politics, the party politics of it. I'd be interested in reflection at the moment when you sort of presided over political communities populations and seeing where we're at today with relationships really southern east and west, with the interstate case and with the recent migration rise. I'd be sort of interested in what do you think would need to change in those relationships, because we can't really talk about constitutional change without having two healthy, mature governments overseeing this. So I'd be interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, I was lucky. I suppose the years I was in this house for 34 years, I was through the whole Thatcher period, and relationships were bad, and honest, and that's probably putting it at a smile. And then Albert Reynolds and John Major was good building. They did a lot of the foundation work for and John Major would have done more. I've met John Major many times, and he's been over here many times. He would have done more if he could have. He just couldn't. He hadn't got the parliamentary numbers to be able to do it. And then Tony Blair had the majority. And he was able to build on it. So, a lot of this comes back to personalities. Unfortunately, it's not even the system. Like Tony Blair gave a huge amount of time. He had a small team of people who followed his direction, and are prepared to work really hard to find a basis that we could make progress. And that's went badly back. Now, and I'm afraid I have to mention Brexit because of this. You see, in all my years, when I was Minister for Labour, Minister for Finance, Taoiseach, every day there was meetings of civil servants across public servants, state, local government, meeting and engaging in whatever it was. Could be security situation, it could have been agriculture, it could have been small business, it could have been whatever. So all the time there was that ongoing debate. Now there's none. All these, and by and large the Irish and the British officials worked really well. They may not have always been on the one sheet, but they were nearly always on the one sheet. And when they weren't on the one sheet, they were able to kind of narrow their differences down and not speak against each other. And it was a really good relationship. And officials here would go to golf outings with guys over there, and fellas would go drinking with them. That's the way it was. I'd be over in Brussels, and You go down, you meet the Irish officials, Katie O'Shea, years ago, you go down, you meet them, the British officials, and they all, now that ended. That ended because of the British decision to leave Brexit, not the Northern Ireland people, but the British decision to leave Brexit. Northern Ireland unfortunately got sucked into that decision. So the relations now haven't been as good. And I think the personalities now, it's not that personalities are bad, it's just that they don't have the same opportunities. I mean, I think we've now seen a number of Taoiseachs who would have all been, I think, sociable, and British Prime Ministers who would have been sociable. But the whole system has changed, and that's there. Now, just to be a bit positive as I finish that bit reply, I think Keir Starmer, there's probably been no British politician, we were talking about this earlier, who would know Northern Ireland better than Keir Starmer. He's been years working in Northern Ireland in his day job. So he knows the place, and he knows the personalities, and he'll come, bar a miracle, he'll come to the job, I think, with a new determination. So I think we're into relationships being better. I think before we have our Christmas dinner, please God, we'll see that things will be better, you know. But I do put it down to two things. The personalities at the top people is key. And then you have that officials being there. Like the British Irish parliamentary groups, the Intergovernmental Conference, they used to work swimmingly good, you know, back over the years. Now tomorrow, tomorrow I meet the House of Lords Northern Ireland Committee up the road. So you know, so we are building up that, but Brexit, you know, people talk about, and I totally understand, you know, how the Brexit and the trade thing, and I think you make a fair point that maybe people here didn't get that enough. I accept totally your argument on that. But the damaging thing about Brexit was not just that, it was the people meeting. That really was the killer, you know. And I hope all you young people live to a day where we might get away from that again. That we'd be able to get back to those relationships, because if we don't, it won't be good, you know.
I think you had a question.
Yeah, hi, I'm Sarah. So thank you so much for both of you for being here. It's been really interesting. I'm from a very international background myself. I'm Irish Moroccan, and obviously in the peacemaking process there was like international help from America. I'm just wondering, maybe like in the future of this New Ireland, of the New Ireland Commission, do you see it being involved in like peacemaking process and reconciliation process in other countries where there's similar situations as in like North and South?
Yeah, I think the Foreign Affairs set up a division where, you know, they're very involved, and Glencree, you know, have a very good group. So I think that those groups, there's not a week where there's not some international group over here. I'm very involved in Queen's. I lecture in Queen's, and adjunct professor in Queen's, and in George Mitchell's College, and conflict resolution, and there's people from everywhere in the world. You know, sometimes I feel a bit terrified that they all think we have the solutions to the world, and we don't. We don't by any means. But there is, and I know in Morocco you have your own difficulties. And I met just about a month ago or 6 weeks ago, I met some of the Moroccan leaders of those people who are in the area where they feel they're not getting and I've been over to the Moroccan conference a number of times. So I think there is really good engagement, and at any one time there's about 20 conflicts in the world, 20 substantial conflicts. So unfortunately it's an area where you'll never go out of business if you're involved in conflict resolution, I'm afraid.
Thank you. I think we're ready to go, yeah.
Yeah, thanks Conor, and thanks Paul and yourself for putting this on today. There's been a lot of referral to how we get unionists involved in this conversation. Probably is the biggest question to it. But there's also another side of that where there's a subsection of the southern population that are at best apathetic to this conversation, that don't want to speak about it. And like Simon Harris came out a couple of weeks ago, I think, and said that he's from a generation where they're more familiar with Berlin and Belfast, and he got in trouble for it, but he's probably right. And there is a huge, maybe a third, that either don't want to United Ireland for whatever reason, or just don't want to take part.
That's really important, because I feel what turns people off in the conversation, if when there's the simplistic answers, it's thrown up, it'll cost you 80 billion, and then they turn off the TV. They don't want to hear about increased taxes or anything else, which of course is not the way to. I think they'll only be sucked into the debate when they realise the real things that affect our daily lives. I mean, how the whole system works, and what are the pillars that are being put together to make a new Ireland work. I think they'll, I'm not saying everyone will turn on, but when it's not just thrown out the question, we're going to have a vote someday, and there's no detail, no context, there's no substance to the whole argument. So I think that's the work that has to be done to convince people to sway into it. And particularly in the border, I was in Cavan the other night, and when you're on the border, either north or south, it's amazing how the debate is very different to if you're in Dublin. In the border, they realise that if they now have peace, the tourism, people are moving back and forward, business is moving, people now have clients who are unionists and loyalists and nationalists and republicans, and they're all getting on, and they're very different. In Dublin, we all say, well, that issue might come up someday, and in the meantime, don't be bothering me, I'm more worried about whatever, So you're right, but there is a substantial section of people, and by the way, they would vote against the agreement unless it's all put together properly. They'd say, oh, this is too much hassle for us, so unless that work is done, you'll be singing the wrong tune, and afraid having a vote.
I'm keen to keep on time here to finish, but there's a couple of Amanda who's at the back, and I just want to acknowledge Amanda as a journalist. You've come to multiple events, you turn up at workshops with young people, you turn up at events, and we do appreciate you coming along and taking an interest in the work of the Commission, and that as much to hold us to account as covering our work, because it's really healthy and important.
I've come down to Belfast tonight to listen to this, because I think the conversation and what's at stake is too important to not be across all the detail and to question people. And Bertie, whenever I was listening to you talking, I probably wrote down about 10 different questions, so I'll narrow it down to 4, and you can answer them in whatever order you want. The first one was just in the Irish News Today. In your interview, you had said that the most desirable outcome for people in communities is Irish unity. Whenever we're having these conversations, whenever you ask someone the very basic question, why do you want Irish unity? It sometimes hasn't been answered, so that's my first question. Why do you want Irish unity? The second one is, there's an understandable focus on unionists and their participation in these conversations, but I'm just wondering, do you have any message for Northern nationalists, Northern Republicans who are perhaps frustrated at the pace of change and are slightly alarmed when they hear people talking about maybe 20 years and medium term rather than something a little bit faster than that? The next thing was, you outlined why you don't believe a citizens' assembly is the way forward and your alternatives to that, but specifically, why is the citizens' assembly not the right vehicle in this conversation? And the last one is, when do you think the political parties who don't have an electoral presence in the north should be standing for election?
Well, if I try and get back to your first one, why would I like to say? I think this is, Ireland has a long geographical presence in the world, and I think for a small island for us, the aspiration that's been there that we were always united, and we should be united. We're a small landlocked, and I think I would love to see that this small island, a small part of Europe, not the mind of the world, would be able to work in harmony and peace, and I think that would be good for all of us. So that we didn't every day have to be talking about, as we are in the present thing, about immigration, it's the border. We talk about trade, it's the border. It's always the border. The NHS in the north, HSE in the south. It would be so much more, and that's the reason I said it is, in my view, the best option, that we have a an island where we could all work together, and as we did for hundreds and hundreds of years before 1921, thousands of years. The political parties one, I think it's good that political parties, you know, should engage on an all-island basis. I would have liked to see my own party doing that, but it's not to be. I think it's now, I suppose we've so many parties now, but more and more of them are working on an all-island basis. And I think even Fine Gael have said, and the Northern Ireland Labour Party used to be there, it's not so much now. So, but I think the idea of an all-island basis is good, but I don't see much change in that, to be honest. I don't see. What was your second one? Citizens Assembly, because I've gone to a few of the Citizens Assembly, and you know what happens is you get a group of people in who are experts and they present their cases. I think this one is so important that the work has to evolve up, and people have to prepare it. You know, getting a few experts in to say how local government will integrate North and South isn't real, and it's not real in this issue. I mean, in this issue, or you know, someone gets up, an expert, and said, "Oh, PSNI could integrate with the Guards because in Outer Mongolia they did that 50 years ago, and I did a paper on it and got a PhD and a gold medal." You know, I just don't think that's the way of dealing with this issue. I think this issue has to be, you know, to be done properly and managed properly, and getting 100 people, even if they're the best 100 people in the world, into a room is not the way to do it. And then
the final bit about a word for the Northern Nationalists who are frustrated.
yeah, I think you know, if you want to rush the vote and get it defeated, then you're not serious about wanting. But I want to see the work done so that it passes that we try and convince my friend, and we convince him that he sees this, that he and I and Jim Alistair will all canvass together for it, and that's what I want. That's what I want to see. I don't want to be having a vote where I know you and I will be on opposite sides of the fence. So you have to do it properly. Thank you very much. Thanks for your interest.
A very quick question. It's okay. Then we're going to finish. Thank you, John, for coming.
Thanks for coming. There's a bit of canvassing going on.
Good man.
I'm fascinated on psychotherapist by profession, so I'm always interested in the psychological aspect. And so there are conversations in the Republic, I think, that haven't been asked Bertie when it comes to that. There are people, you know, in the north who feel nationalist Republicans who felt abandoned by governments in the Republic over a period of time. And that conversation, just feel angry about that. And yet there are conversations on our side where there was a real feeling of humiliation, of powerlessness, of a complete powerlessness when it came to British governments who simply wouldn't allow an Irish government to have a kind of say in the voice. There's what I call the sort of Patrick Keelty factor, where you hear people say, he had an awful lot of Northerners on it. And it's funny how quickly embedded psychologically separation happens. I remember being in East Berlin 10 years after the Berlin Wall came down, and in a restaurant, and the restaurateur was an East Berliner, and he couldn't stop making the point of how better the food was in the East Berlin restaurants compared to the West Berlin restaurant. So it only took 40 years in Berlin to create divided mentalities and psychologies. The other one, I suppose, is the Ireland's Call mentality, where there's an awful lot of people in the Republic who don't understand why we have one anthem for a national rugby team, who don't understand why our Armadian is not the only anthem, aside from the merits of Ireland's Call, musically or otherwise. So there's a big leap. There's lots of conversations to be had here. Partitioning affects people psychologically. Bertie to there, when there's people here say, look, we prefer not face that. And there's a lot of wounds, a lot of hurts, and it's within communities and then between communities, within the Republic, between the Republic and the North, within the North, between the Republic and the UK, between the North and the UK. It's a very, very interesting dynamic. So it's not a question I'm throwing out.
May I just on that, because I suppose that actually informs the approach of our commission, which is to ensure that we engage as broadly and as widely as possible. And as I keep saying, if the commission is invited, someone will go. We have been sincere. We've been working with groups in the London Irish community. We've been working with the political parties here in the south, because they obviously have the established networks in terms of branches and members, etc. So we are very keen as a commission to engage in that conversation, to be part of that conversation. But I suppose, as the conversation we had earlier, no one party, no one commission could possibly undertake it, and it's going to take, I suppose, the initiative of all of us having a responsibility to be part of that conversation. But also, I believe it's why government will have a role to play in helping the island to have those conversations and some kind of great dialogue across this island. But I think the points you've raised are really important. It's why the work we're doing, what we're doing, and what we're doing. Yeah.
Who are trusted
Right.
across the board, who are seen not to have vested
Right.
interests and not to have agendas,
Correct.
but are trusted by people as having
Yeah.
interests of kind of
Right.
all parts.
John, there's one point that from what John says that strikes me, that you said earlier on, Conor, about, you know, those people that say, just leave it alone and don't do anything. Now, as I answered you at the time, it's because of what it says in the Good Friday Agreement. But it's the other thing that, you know, that happened a few times in the past. And then you ended up with the problems of the 30s. And then it happened in the 56-62 campaign of the IRA, which was mainly a southern attack by people from the south into the border, Sean South and all the stories that went with that. And then it came back with the civil rights movement. So, like, the difficulty, just leaving things alone and say, sure, it's grand now, there's no problem now, everything will be great forevermore. And not just in this country, but it's a bit like whatever view you want to have on 1948 and Gaza and the Middle East. But these things don't go away. My real fear of the whole Gaza thing is that people keep talking about the 7th of October. I mean, it was that the date in 1948, because that's where, if you want to find a solution, you have to go back to 48 and find the solution. And, you know, and if you don't do that, you're not going to solve this, because all you're going to do is push it down the road again, one side or the other. And we shouldn't fall into that trap, because some generation on either side or the other will say in X number of years' time, oh, we haven't got what we thought, this wasn't the way we saw it, we didn't envisage. And, you know, nothing is ever static. You're either going forward or you're going back. So those who say, just leave this alone, are not alone. And some of them, I think I know some of the people who would attack you, Conor, they would say, oh, you know, they're the stuck in the mud guys, they're the negative people. You know, we're the progressive people. Who is progressive will want to be debating it. Anyone who is otherwise, they're the stuck in the mud people, and that's the answer you should give to them.
Ladies and gentlemen, can you please thank Bertie Ahern for